Eyewitness News. Prepare and protect 2025 wildfire threats.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this special edition of Eyewitness News Investigates. I'm Chief Meteorologist Ilya Naiman. Wildfires have become a common issue for us here in Kern County, California, and the western United States. Here in the Golden State alone in 2024, it was a historic season. Over 8,000 wildfires ignited, with just over 1 million acres burned. The largest fire, the Park Fire, which scorched nearly 430,000 acres in Northern California. The second largest, according to CAL FIRE, was the Burrell Fire, burning tens of thousands of acres here in Kern County. That fire is considered the largest wildfire to burn in Kern County's history, starting after a fiery crash off the side of Highway 178 west of Democrat Road. The man behind the wheel was killed and reportedly under the influence. In the end, over 59,000 acres burned, over 200 structures destroyed, and the small mountain community of Havilah forever changed, as much of it was reduced to ashes. It was considered 100% contained 53 days after burning on September 16th. Well, we've already seen a few brush fires ignite in our area in just the last few weeks. The most recent and largest one, the Jaw Fire, that one erupting this past Monday near Kelso Valley and Jawbone Canyon. That's north of Tehachapi. It's burned over 4,000 acres in just the first few days. Another fire in the Kern River Valley, shutting down Highway 178 through the canyon for some time this past week. The Democrat Fire, burning about 1,000 acres. These recent fires sparking concern on what's possibly to come this year. Our very own Will Silverstein joins us now. He's been covering these fires for us and spoke to local fire officials who gave him a preview on what crews are preparing for over the next few months. Will, thanks for joining us.
Ilya, thank you for having me.
So here are the questions. What was covering last year's fire season like? What stood out the most to you?
I think what stood out the most to me, Ilya, was just how much we saw cover so many different parts of Kern County and the Central Valley. Of course, we saw what happened with the Burrell Fire going up into the Kern River Canyon and the mountains there. But we also saw fires taking place in large open field spaces, too, right around this time last year in May. Then once again, aside from the Jaw Fire and then the school fire, in Jaw Fire and the Democrat Fire from just now, we also saw the school fire last year all start in the month of May, meaning right now is that time when that fire starts.
Wow. Well, what were your biggest takeaways with how the fires were combated by our fire crews?
I think the biggest takeaway was how cooperative each of the fire agencies are with each other. So with the Kern County Fire Department, they do a very good job at working alongside the Bureau of Land Management, for example, the U.S. Forest Service, and then when needed, unfortunately, when they were needed, the CAL FIRE crews as well during the Burrell Fire. And of course, we saw at that same time several hotshot crews come from around the state. That's what struck me the most, was the amount of collaborative efforts that were taking place by fire departments.
So how do you think the LA fires have shaped KCFD and other departments around our area?
I think they shaped it because January we don't typically think of fire season in, and that's when we saw these fires take place. So I think they're now unfortunately used to this situation where they have to go out and fight fires any time of year and be ready at a moment's notice.
Yeah, finally, one more question. What can people do to protect their homes from fire?
Well, the biggest thing they can do, and you'll hear Kern County Fire say it all the way through the month of June, as that's the deadline for defensible space. So taking care of defensible spacing on your homes, that is making sure that you have limbs of trees that are cut, that your grasses aren't too long, things like that, to make sure that you don't have too much dry vegetation around. And if a fire were to take place, if embers blow, like I'm sure that you saw, unfortunately they did during the LA fires, that they don't catch, they have less things to catch to and stick to a person's home, and that those large wildfires that we see don't end up consuming your home in the future. And I think that's a very important thing to keep aware of, and the Kern County Fire Department has been pressing for some time.
All great advice, Will. Will Silverstein, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, we are going to take a look at what we can expect this fire season that's already here. What causes wildfires? You've got a spark, anything that can ignite that fire. Either it's a weather event, lightning strikes usually, or it's human caused. That's typically the case. And sometimes a combination. It could be vehicle, it could be cigarette butts, it could be fireworks. We saw that happen allegedly earlier on this year. And then you've got the fuel, which is plants, vegetation, brush that is dry, especially after a period where there's little to no rain. And that is the fuel. The oxygen is there. And then you've got the fire. Add to that the weather, which is what we track here, and you've got a situation that could really be significant as far as the strong winds, the drought, which could be an ongoing situation, as far as things that can exacerbate that fire. We're watching our local fire weather patterns. Usually there's warm to hot weather and dry, afternoon and evening winds. Occasionally in the summertime, the monsoon thunderstorms show up, and sometimes they can produce dry lightning. And then we've got the SoCal Santa Ana winds, typical in the fall to early winter months, and that is what we saw in LA several months ago. What can cause these winds in the afternoon that we here experience in Kern County just about every single day? You've got cold air over the water that's chilly, hot air over the land that's hot, and you've got a pressure situation. High pressure due to the cold air, low pressure as hot air rises, and the combination of that gives you wind that will go from a high to a low, and that is your onshore flow, the sea breeze, and these winds rush in through the canyons, passes the mountains, and they get strongest in the desert. We see that's very common. The monsoon, typically in July to August, September, high pressure over the Intermountain West gets a southeasterly flow from Mexico. Thunderstorms come up, and occasionally, if the moisture is lagging, lightning can be replacing the downpours that we usually see, and that can trigger some of these fires around Kern County. Finally, Santa Ana winds, typical for Southern California. High pressure that is over the north, low pressure to our south. The winds get strong between the two. The canyons help funnel it, and voila, you've got tremendously strong fires that LA is all too common with. Wildfire outlook for this year, we've got the drought that's not very severe right now. It's moderate across parts of Central California, much more significant to our south and east. You've got the warm ocean to our west, but colder waters off of California. That could feed the sea breezes, and this was basically released just a few weeks ago. You've got the outlook from CPC indicating the possibility of more moisture in Arizona this summer. We're watching these dry, warm, and breezy conditions, and sometimes the monsoonal potential in the coming months as well. So we will be keeping you aware of the weather out there. You may think that wildfire danger pertains to just mountain communities, but experts say that's not always the case. Urban areas could also see the threat of fires if the conditions are just right. Lincoln Graves takes a look at why you should pay attention to fire danger no matter where you live.
Across the American West, more and more urban city dwellers are thinking about fire danger.
The first year we were here, I was like,
It's crossed Marie Riker's mind,
well, maybe a little bit in the summertime when all the green weeds turn brown.
as well as the mind of her neighbor,
About 28 years.
Randy Hansen.
These weeds here on the hillside here just start to get out of hand.
Marie and Randy don't live in typical wildfire country. A suburban Salt Lake City neighborhood, far from deep forests or rugged hillsides. A major freeway 100 yards away. But across the street, the Jordan River Parkway. A peaceful, tranquil place most of the time, but where vegetation can dry out and become fuel for wildfires.
You live in the middle of the valley, basically, right? You're far from the mountains.
Right.
But you've worried about wildfire before.
Oh yeah. Yeah, after seeing, the fires in LA and everything and how devastating it can just destroy a whole neighborhood in a heartbeat.
The Los Angeles wildfires are the most recent example of how flames can race through urban neighborhoods. At least 30 people were killed. More than 18,000 structures, mostly homes, were burned. A year and a half earlier, a wildfire destroyed Lahaina, Hawaii, killing more than 100. And a year and a half before that, the Marshall Fire roared across neighborhoods near Boulder, Colorado, killing 2 and burning more than 1,000 homes. All these fires started as wildfires, which then moved toward neighborhoods.
But then it moves into something that is very different, and that is that structure-to-structure ignition.
Brent Olson is Division Chief of Wildland Operations for Clackamas Fire, a department in suburban Portland, Oregon. His agency very nearly had a worst-case scenario in the fall of 2020, when historic wildfires came close to major population centers. 500,000 people were under some level of evacuation order.
We really didn't think it could happen to us, and it did.
Olson says that if fires reach urban areas, spread by extreme conditions, everything changes.
And at that point, I no longer term it a wildfire and what we traditionally think of as trees and brush and things of that nature. It really morphs into that more closely aligns with an urban conflagration.
Crews are somewhat powerless when a fire reaches that point, but that doesn't mean urban areas aren't trying to prepare. The 2020 fires led Olson's agency to create a 20-person Type 2 strike team. It was the first such wildland hand crew set up by a structural fire department in Oregon.
We've just onboarded and started their initial training for the 2025 season.
Elsewhere in the West, like Las Vegas and its hot desert climate, vegetation fires are somewhat less common. That is unless extremely wet years lead to a bumper grass crop, which later become tinder dry fuel. In those years, Vegas area departments will zero in on prevention and preparation.
We see the trends with us. When we have grass years, we want to be a little bit more protective of what we have going on. We want to push prevention more. We want to say, hey, don't be going out there doing your illegal fireworks.
Some cities now have wildland-specific fire stations. This is one in the Avenues neighborhood of Salt Lake City, with different types of engines to access rugged terrain.
And then we have a Type 3 that's housed at one of our wildland stations that is meant for wildland apparatus, and also Type 6s for wildland apparatus, so that we can get into those more difficult terrain areas.
Many lines of defense to stop an urban conflagration, but the last line of defense might just be homeowners themselves. While Marie loves living across from the river, she has occasionally wondered if bad behavior might prove disastrous.
We get a lot of walkers through here, and I guess if somebody's smoking and drops their cigarette, I guess it could be.
Started burning up that way.
Randy worries much more. As river vegetation grows and dries out, he takes matters into his own hands.
I get over there with my own private lawnmower and personal lawnmower and take it down, cut it down, just try to clean it up.
A last stand effort to stop a wildfire from spreading to his home and the homes of his neighbors.
Keep an eye on it, because we could be in the same boat LA was. You just never know.
I'm Lincoln Graves reporting.
Still ahead on Prepare and Protect. Embers are a huge factor when it comes to flames spraying to homes, but one company is changing the game by fireproofing them. How the business is already doing it in one SoCal neighborhood.
Eyewitness News. Prepare and Protect 2025 wildfire threats. We'll be right back. Eyewitness News. Prepare and Protect 2025 wildfire threats. Welcome back.
Thanks again for joining us. Clearing dry brush and grass from a property is a good first step to protecting your homes from wildfires. But one builder in San Diego is taking things up a notch. As Liz Gonzalez reports, it's now created the country's first fire-resistant neighborhood.
Watch this test in a research chamber as embers fly towards a home. 4 minutes in, and the mulch on the left side is starting to smolder. 8 minutes in, there are now flames, and by the 12-minute mark, those flames have spread to the porch, while the right side remains virtually untouched. The difference? It's following standards developed by the nonprofit Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, or IBHS.
Their program takes that to a little bit of a different level.
Steve Ruffner is the president of KB Home Coastal, the company behind the country's first fire-resistant and fire-prepared neighborhood in Escondido.
We are building in a very high fire zone because we're at the foot of a mountain, or basically a hillside in San Diego County.
But all 64 homes in the Dixon Trails neighborhood are designed to protect against direct flame contact, radiant heat, and embers. They feature Class A fire-rated roofs, non-combustible gutters, upgraded windows and doors, and ember and flame-resistant vents.
And then the eaves are stuccoed so that embers can't get up into the attic. So there's no open eaves. And then the vents are all the fire-resistant 1/8-inch mesh, which prevents embers from going into the vent structures.
They also feature fences made out of metal instead of wood, which can catch fire, and a 5-foot buffer zone around the home.
IBHS found in the fires that were recent in LA that was a big problem, is that, vegetation and ignition points around the house were really difficult to control.
Ruffner says taking these measures from the onset of construction is a game changer compared to doing it to an older home.
This is kind of a project we like to be an innovator. So far, our customers are really pleased with it. They really feel safer.
That was Liz Gonzalez reporting. Still to come on Prepare and Protect. Some of the biggest causes of destructive wildfires are faulty power lines. Now there's a push to put those lines underground. Why some utility companies are saying that might not be the best way.
Eyewitness News. Prepare and Protect 2025 Wildfire Threats. We'll be right back.
Welcome back in. Wildfire prevention can take many forms, from creating defensible space to trimming trees. Homeowners and utilities alike are working to protect people and property. One method growing in popularity, undergrounding power lines, but it's expensive. Barry Mangold digs into whether the upfront costs are worth it in the long run.
The 2018 Camp Fire in California left communities devastated. 85 killed, 18,000 structures destroyed. The city of Paradise left mostly in ashes. The fire sparked by power lines owned by the utility company, Pacific Gas and Electric. Wildfires started by power lines like these are actually uncommon. Nearly 90% of all the wildfires in 2024 were human-caused. But with the threat of wildfires raging once again going into this summer season, utility companies are doing everything they can to prevent the next big blaze. And one city in Colorado is decades ahead of the curve.
We feel really comfortable that we've mitigated that risk.
Travis Walker is the Power and Light Director for Fort Collins. Since the 1970s, the city has undergrounded over 99% of its nearly 2,000 miles of distribution lines. So for the average resident of Fort Collins, how often do they experience a power outage in a given year?
Sure. So the average customer in Fort Collins sees a 45-minute outage every 4 years. So that's every 4 years.
45 minutes every 4 years.
Yes.
Is there any risk of starting a wildfire with underground power lines?
I would say it's not zero. You know, there might be cables that come up into a transformer, and that transformer might fault and, you know, throw some flames out the side, but it's very, very rare that would happen.
Since the Camp Fire, PG&E has committed to move 10,000 miles of power lines underground, which is roughly 10% of its distribution system. The company says the change nearly eliminates wildfire ignition risk, and it's not the only one that thinks so. In Utah, Rocky Mountain Power started work to underground lines in high-risk areas in 2022. The same goes for NV Energy in Nevada, which started focusing on undergrounding around Lake Tahoe in 2023. And just this year, Idaho Power identified 7 miles of lines to underground through 2026, which begs the question.
Why don't you put all power lines underground? Well, it's not that simple.
In Oregon, Portland General Electric has nearly 29,000 miles of transmission line in its power grid, which is less than a third than its California counterpart, PG&E.
And so it's easy to look at that and
John Farmer, the public affairs officer at Portland General, says more than half are already in the dirt. He says the reason they don't underground everything comes down to the customer.
How much would it cost to underground the rest of it?
So, one of the things when you think about undergrounding power lines, cost is one of the key factors that you have to think about. If we were to put our entire distribution system underground right now, the cost would be on the order of tens of billions of dollars.
Tens of billions.
Tens of billions of dollars.
That cost, he says, would translate to power bills going up by thousands of dollars for every customer. Compare that cost to the roughly $25 billion that PG&E had to pay to settle lawsuits related to the Camp Fire and other blazes in the late 2010s. Farmer says the utility considers the cost of uprooting buried power lines for routine maintenance and instead invests in meteorologists, AI-powered cameras to spot smoke, fire-resistant poles, and early alert systems.
Undergrounding is effective, no doubt. However, it is not always the most effective or most cost-effective or most appropriate solution for a certain stretch of power lines.
Do you think it's worth the trade-off?
It has been for us.
In Portland, I'm Barry Mangold reporting.
When we come back to wrap up our special, drought conditions are no stranger to the Western United States, but one expert says it could get even worse. The warning on what they say could be the new normal.
It was a much different 2024 to 2025 than the last two seasons that had prolific amounts of rainfall. Above average precipitation in the preceding years led to an enormous amount of vegetation growth across Southern California. Then this year comes in starting off a lot drier.
That was just part of my conversation with meteorologists from our Sinclair stations across California, going in depth on the fire dangers that we face here in California as well as in Kern County. You can watch our digital exclusive special as well as this special you're watching right now over on our YouTube page. Just search Bakersfield Now. Finally, here tonight, an extended drought in the southwest United States has exacerbated wildfire season throughout the region. As Dana Wagner reports, it could get even worse.
There was a time not that long ago that Lake Mead near Las Vegas and Lake Powell in southern Utah were full. Plenty of water for 40 million people in 7 states along the Colorado River. Well, those days are long gone, as I documented some 20 years ago in this report from Hoover Dam.
To give you an idea of the depth of the problem, we came out here to Lake Mead about 4 years ago. I could have reached over this wall here at Hoover Dam, just about touched the top of the lake. Look at it now.
Our drought that we're in today has been going on for about 25 years.
Colby Pellegrino with the Southern Nevada Water Authority doesn't think it's going to get any better anytime soon. In fact, she thinks it'll get even worse moving forward.
I think the new normal is hotter and drier. I think what's scary is the new normal actually may be drier than what we're experiencing today.
Just to orient you a little bit, Lake Powell sits on the state line in between Utah and Arizona. Lake Mead sits on the state line between Nevada and northwestern Arizona, and their two are connected by the Colorado River, which runs about 300 miles between the two reservoirs right through the Grand Canyon. All of that water, at least most of it, comes from snowmelt on the western slopes of the Rocky Mountains located to the west of Denver. There are about 40 million Americans that rely on the Colorado River for their main water source. Right now, Lake Powell sits at 31% capacity. Lake Mead is at 32% capacity. In fact, over the last 2.5 decades of drought, Lake Mead has fallen about 140 feet. In addition to providing water to grow crops, among other things, the Colorado River provides drinking water for Denver, Salt Lake City, Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, and 90% of the drinking water for Las Vegas. Arizona and Nevada have been forced to take less water from the two lakes because of a shortage on the river declared by the federal government 4 years ago. And realizing the dire nature of the situation, California is also cutting back on consumption on a voluntary basis.
I think the reality is everyone needs to use less water. Right now, we're using more water than Mother Nature's providing us.
Days ago, the National Weather Service predicted runoff into the Colorado River will amount to about 55% of an average year, much lower than their previous estimate. So there's little doubt that the levels of Lake Powell and Lake Mead will go down even further this summer. In Las Vegas, I'm Dana Wagner reporting.
Well, that does it for our special tonight. Prepare and protect. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Ilya Naiman, and from all of us right here at Eyewitness News, have a great night.